When was the last time you looked at your life and asked yourself, honestly, with no excuses and no one around to comfort you, whether the person you are today is the person you always dreamed of becoming? Because that question is not easy, and most people will never ask it. And the ones who do ask it but look away from the answer are the ones who spend their whole lives feeling like something is missing, like there is a gap between who they are and who they could be. And that feeling, that quiet and heavy feeling in your chest, is not weakness. It is a signal. It is a message from the best version of yourself, saying that there is still time, that the clock has not stopped, that the story is not over. My name is not important, but this channel is. And welcome, truly welcome, to English to Inspire, the place where you learn English and change your life at the same time. Because language is not just grammar and vocabulary. Language is power. Language is the door to opportunities that your current self cannot even imagine yet. And every single word you learn here is a key, a real key, to a bigger and better world. If this mission speaks to your heart, if you feel that this is exactly what you needed to find today, then please subscribe to this channel, because there are people out there who need this too, and your subscription helps us reach them. So do it now, not at the end, now, today. We are going to talk about a man who had every reason to give up, a man who grew up with almost nothing, who was laughed at, rejected, and told in 1,000 different ways that he was not enough, not tall enough, not serious enough, not talented enough. And yet this man, this small man from the broken streets of Philadelphia, became one of the most successful entertainers on the entire planet, selling out stadiums, building a business empire, and inspiring hundreds of millions of people across the world. And his name is Kevin Hart. But here's what I need you to understand before we go deeper, because this is the most important thing I will say today, and I need you to hear it clearly. Kevin Hart's story is not about fame. It is not about money. It is not about Hollywood. It is about a decision, a single, painful, and powerful decision that every human being on this earth must make at some point. The decision to stop waiting for life to get easier and to start becoming someone who is stronger. Because the world does not reward the people who wait. The world rewards the people who move, who fall and get up, who hurt and keep going, who have every reason to stop and choose every single morning to start again. And as you listen to every word of this story, I want you to ask yourself not what Kevin Hart did, but what you are doing right now with the time, the pain, and the fire that you already have inside you. Philadelphia is not a soft city, and if you have never been there, if you have only seen it in movies or heard the name in passing, then you need to understand something real about what it means to grow up in the streets of North Philadelphia in the 1980s. Because it means you wake up every day in a world that was not designed for you to win, a world where the buildings are tired, where the opportunities are few, where the adults around you are fighting their own battles just to keep the lights on and food on the table. And it is in this world, this hard and honest world, that Kevin Darnell Hart was born on July 6th, 1979, into a family that was already cracking under pressure before he was old enough to understand what pressure even meant. His mother, Nancy Hart, was the kind of woman that this world does not celebrate enough. A small and determined woman who worked constantly, who sacrificed silently, who held the family together with her bare hands while the man who was supposed to stand beside her was disappearing, slowly and then completely, into a world of drugs and absence, because Kevin's father, Henry Witherspoon, was an addict. A man trapped in a cycle that stole him from his children and left 2 young boys, Kevin and his older brother Robert, growing up in a home that had love on one side and a very painful emptiness on the other. Now I need you to stop for just 1 second and feel what that means. Not as a fact, not as a detail in a biography, but as a human experience. Because growing up without a present father is not just sad, it is disorienting. It shakes the foundation of who you think you are. It makes you ask questions that no child should have to ask. Questions like, why am I not enough to make him stay? And those questions, if you let them, will follow you for the rest of your life and slowly convince you that you are smaller than you really are. And Kevin Hart, this boy from North Philly, felt all of that weight, carried all of that confusion, and still had to go to school the next morning and pretend that everything was fine. Because that is what you do when you are young and hurting and you do not yet have the words for what you are feeling. But here is what pain does to certain kinds of people. And this is the part I want you to hold on to. As you learn these words and absorb this story, pain either breaks you or it builds you. And the difference between those two outcomes is not talent. It is not luck. It is not where you were born, or who your father was, or how much money was in the house. The difference is what you decide to do with the fire that the pain creates inside you. Because every difficult childhood, every absent parent, every cold night and empty refrigerator is also, if you choose to see it this way, fuel. And Kevin Hart, without knowing it yet, was collecting fuel every single day, storing it, living inside it. And one day, not too far from now in this story, he was going to use every single drop. There is a moment in the life of almost every person who eventually becomes great. A moment that does not look like greatness at all. A moment that looks like the opposite of greatness. A moment that looks like humiliation, like failure, like a sign from the universe that you chose the wrong path and you should go home and never try again. And for Kevin Hart, that moment came early, and it came hard. Because the first time Kevin Hart walked onto a stage to make people laugh, the people did not laugh. They did not smile politely. They did not give him a chance to find his rhythm. They booed him, loudly and without mercy. And if you have never been booed, if you have never stood in front of a room full of people and felt their rejection hit you like a wave, then you cannot fully understand how devastating that experience is. Because it is not just embarrassing, it is deeply personal. It reaches inside you and grabs the part of you that was already afraid. The part that whispered before you even walked on that stage that you were not ready, that you were not funny, that you were not enough. And suddenly that whisper becomes a roar coming from every corner of the room. Kevin was a teenager working at a shoe store during the day and sneaking into open mic nights in Philadelphia during the evenings, telling jokes under a fake name, calling himself Lil Kev, trying to build something in the small hours of the night while the world around him was not watching and not caring. And the early results were brutal, because comedy is one of the most unforgiving art forms that exists. There is no polite applause for a joke that does not land. There is only silence or rejection. And Kevin experienced both so many times in those early years that a person with less hunger, a person with less fire in their belly, would have walked away and never looked back. And here's the part that I need you to understand because it connects directly to your life and to whatever dream you are carrying around right now. Most people quit not because they are not talented. Most people quit because they cannot handle the gap. The painful and humiliating gap between where they are and where they want to be. And that gap is real. It is uncomfortable. It is full of moments where you feel stupid and small and lost. But the gap is also the training ground. It is the place where the real work happens. It is where you discover whether your dream is something you just like or something you cannot live without. Kevin Hart could not live without making people laugh. It was not a hobby. It was not a plan B. It was the thing that made him feel alive, in a life that had given him many reasons to feel the opposite. And so he kept going back to the small rooms, back to the microphone, back to the risk of being rejected again. Because every time he got back on that stage, he was sending a message to his own fear. He was saying, I see you, and I am going anyway. And that message, repeated night after night in small clubs across Philadelphia and then Boston and then New York, was slowly building something invisible, but absolutely real. It was building the unbreakable belief that one day, if he refused to stop, the laughter would come. There is a difference between knowing your story and owning your story. And that difference is everything. Because almost everyone knows their story. Almost everyone can tell you where they came from, what happened to them, who hurt them, what they lost, what was taken from them before they were even old enough to protect it. But very few people, and I mean very few, have the courage to look at that same story and decide that it belongs to them completely. Not as a wound, not as an excuse, not as a reason why life is harder for them than for everyone else, but as material, as power, as the very foundation of everything they are about to build. And this is the shift that happened inside Kevin Hart at a certain point in his journey. A shift that did not happen overnight. A shift that came slowly and painfully through years of failure and reflection and honest conversations with himself in the mirror. The kind of conversations that most people avoid because the truth that lives in the mirror is not always comfortable. It is not always kind, and it demands something from you the moment you see it clearly. For a long time, Kevin tried to be funny in the way he thought other people wanted him to be funny. He was performing a version of himself that was constructed, that was safe, that kept the most vulnerable and most real parts of his life hidden behind jokes that did not quite land. Because there is a kind of performance that comes from fear. A kind of performance where you show people enough to get their attention, but never enough to let them see who you really are. And that kind of performance will never connect deeply with another human being. Because people do not fall in love with masks. People fall in love with truth. And the truth of Kevin Hart's life was sitting right there. The absent father, the struggling mother, the poverty, the fear, the feeling of being small in a world that rewards size. And the moment he stopped hiding that truth and started speaking it out loud on stage, everything began to change. I want you to think about your own life right now, because this is not just Kevin Hart's lesson. This is your lesson too. And I want you to ask yourself honestly what parts of your story you are hiding. What pain you are pretending does not exist. What experiences you are carrying in silence because you are afraid that if people see the real version of your journey, they will judge you or pity you or see you as less than you want them to see you. Because here is the real talk. The thing nobody tells you when you are busy building your mask. Your story is not your weakness. Your story is your greatest source of power. And the moment you stop apologizing for where you came from and start using it as the engine for where you are going, you will feel something shift inside you that no amount of money or approval or external success could ever create. You will feel free, genuinely and deeply free, because you are no longer spending energy hiding. You are spending energy building, and that energy, that redirected and focused and honest energy, is the most powerful force a human being can possess. And Kevin Hart found it. And it changed everything about the way the world responded to him. Because when you are real, the world cannot ignore you. There is a fantasy that lives in the minds of most people who dream of success. And that fantasy is dangerous, not because it is too big, but because it is incomplete. Because the fantasy always shows you the arrival, the stadium full of people, the bright lights, the applause, the moment when the world finally recognizes who you are and what you are worth. But the fantasy never shows you the part that comes before all of that. The part that is unglamorous and repetitive and exhausting and lonely. The part that happens at 2 a.m. when no one is watching and no one is clapping, and the only reason you are still working is because something deep inside you refuses to let you stop. And that part, that invisible and uncomfortable part, is the only part that actually matters. Because the arrival means nothing without the journey that earned it. And Kevin Hart's journey was built not on talent alone, but on a quality that is available to every single person listening to these words right now. And that quality is work ethic, raw and relentless, and almost unreasonable work ethic. The kind that makes the people around you uncomfortable, because it reminds them of everything they are not doing. When Kevin Hart decided that comedy was his path, he did not decide to try it casually. He did not perform when it was convenient. He did not wait for inspiration to arrive before he showed up. He treated his dream like a job, like the most important job in the world. Because to him, it was. And he drove himself across the country, performing in clubs and bars and small theaters for audiences that sometimes numbered in the dozens, sleeping in cheap hotels, and sometimes in his car, eating badly, living tightly, sacrificing the comfort and security that most people choose over their dreams without even realizing they are making that choice. And he did this not for months, but for years, building his skills one performance at a time, one joke at a time, one small improvement at a time, because he understood something that most people never learn, which is that greatness is not an event. Greatness is an accumulation. It is the result of thousands of small and consistent actions performed with intention and hunger over a long period of time. Now, I want to speak directly to you for a moment, because this is the part of the story where you need to stop being a passive listener and start being an honest one. And I want you to ask yourself what your work ethic looks like right now, not compared to Kevin Hart, not compared to anyone famous, but compared to the dream you say you have, because there is a gap in most people's lives between the size of their dream and the size of their daily effort. And that gap is not filled with talent, or luck, or opportunity. That gap is filled with hours. Real and unglamorous hours of work that nobody sees and nobody celebrates, and the clock is running right now. It is running while you listen to these words. It is running while you sleep, and while you scroll, and while you tell yourself that you will start tomorrow. And tomorrow is the most expensive word in the human language, because it costs you something you can never get back. It costs you today. So the question is not whether you have the talent. The question is whether you have the hunger. Because hunger, real hunger, the kind that wakes you up before the alarm and keeps you going after everyone else has stopped. That hunger is the only thing that turns a dream into a reality. And Kevin Hart had it burning inside him every single day. I want to stop the story for a moment, not because the story is not important, but because you are more important than the story, and there is something that needs to be said directly, clearly, and without any softness. Because sometimes the most caring thing another person can do for you is refuse to let you lie to yourself. And I have been listening, not to your words, because you have not spoken, but to the silence between your thoughts. The silence where your excuses live. The silence where you keep the list of reasons why your situation is different. Why Kevin Hart's story does not apply to you. Why the principles that built his success cannot build yours. And I need you to hear this clearly and without anger. Those reasons are not protecting you. They are imprisoning you. And the bars of that prison are made not from your circumstances, but from your choices. The small and daily choices that you make every single morning when you decide how to spend the hours that life has given you. Real talk. What are you doing with your time? Not in general. Not in theory. Not in the version of your life that you describe to other people when they ask how things are going. But in reality, in the actual minutes and hours of your actual day, what are you doing? Because time is the only resource that is distributed with perfect equality across every human being on this planet. The richest person alive gets the same 24 hours that the poorest person alive gets. The most successful comedian in Hollywood gets the same 24 hours that a young person in Philadelphia with a broken family and an empty pocket gets. And what separates the people who build something from the people who only dream about building something is not intelligence. It is not connections. It is not privilege. It is the decision, made every single day, to use those hours with intention and courage instead of comfort and convenience. I want you to think about the word responsibility, because it is one of the most important words in the English language, and one of the most avoided concepts in modern life. And responsibility does not mean blame. It does not mean that everything that happened to you was your fault. It does not erase the real difficulties and real injustices that exist in this world. But it means that regardless of what happened to you, regardless of who left, who hurt you, who failed you, who gave you less than you deserved, the next chapter of your life is authored by you and only you. And the moment you truly accept that, the moment you stop waiting for an apology from the past and start writing the future with your own hands, everything changes. Not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because you stop fighting the world and start building within it. Are you making excuses right now? Be honest. Are you telling yourself that you will start when the time is right, when the money's there, when the situation improves, when you feel ready. Because I need you to understand that the right time is a myth. It has always been a myth, and the people who wait for it wait forever. While the people who move in spite of the wrong time, in spite of the fear, in spite of the uncertainty, those are the people who one day look back and realize that the wrong time was actually the exact right time, because it built in them a strength that perfect conditions never could. And Kevin Hart never had perfect conditions, not once, and he moved anyway. Every single day, he moved anyway. There is a mathematical truth about success that most people never discover because they give up before the equation has time to complete itself. And that truth is the concept of compounding, the idea that small and consistent actions, repeated over a long enough period of time, do not add up in a straight line, but instead multiply. They grow on top of each other. They build momentum that becomes increasingly difficult to stop. And this is exactly what happened to Kevin Hart over the years that followed his early failures, because he did not wake up one morning famous. He did not post one video that went viral and changed everything overnight. He built his success the way a person builds a wall, one brick at a time, one show at a time, one audience at a time, and each brick was laid on top of the last one, and slowly, almost invisibly, the wall began to rise. Until one day the people who had not been paying attention looked up and saw something that seemed to have appeared from nowhere, but had actually been under construction for years. In the early 2000s, Kevin Hart began to break through in ways that were small but significant. His first comedy album, his first television appearances, his first real taste of an audience that was growing beyond the small clubs of Philadelphia. And with each step forward, he did not relax. He did not celebrate for too long. He did not mistake early progress for arrival, because he understood that momentum is a living thing. It requires constant feeding. It requires you to keep moving even when you feel tired, even when you feel like you have already worked hard enough, even when the people around you are telling you to slow down and enjoy what you have already built, because the hunger inside him was not satisfied by small victories. It was fueled by them. And every sold-out small room made him want the next room to be bigger. By the time Kevin Hart stood on the stage of Madison Square Garden, one of the most iconic venues in the entire world, and looked out at an arena packed with thousands of people who had paid money to hear him speak, who had traveled from different cities and different countries to be in the same room with the boy from North Philadelphia, who had been booed off stages 20 years earlier. That moment was not a miracle. It was not luck. It was not a gift from the universe. It was the visible result of an invisible process. It was the public face of a private discipline. And I want you to feel the weight of that truth, because it applies to everything you are trying to build in your own life right now. Because the results you want to see are already being determined by the actions you are taking or not taking today. In private, when nobody is watching, when there is no applause and no validation and no guarantee that any of it will work. And consistency, in those invisible moments, is the only real competitive advantage that any human being has ever had. Because talent is common. Ideas are common. Dreams are common. But the person who shows up every single day without exception, and does the work without needing to be celebrated, for it is rare. Genuinely and extraordinarily rare. And the world has always been willing to reward that kind of rare with something that looks, from the outside, like overnight success, but is really just the moment when the world finally catches up to the work that was already done. There is a kind of success that makes a person believe they are untouchable, a kind of success that builds walls around you, not to protect you, but to separate you from the humility that got you there in the first place. And it is in those moments of peak success, in those moments when everything seems to be working and the world is celebrating you, and the money is flowing and the opportunities are endless, that life has a habit of sending you a message. Not a gentle message, not a polite tap on the shoulder, but a devastating and undeniable message that reminds you that you are still human, that you are still fragile, that the same universe that lifted you up is under no obligation to keep you there if you forget who you are and what you stand for. And Kevin Hart received that message, not once, but twice in a very short period of time. And the way he responded to those moments says more about his character than any sold-out arena or Hollywood blockbuster ever could. The first fall was public and personal, and painful in a way that fame makes uniquely humiliating. Because when you are a private person and you make a mistake, it stays mostly within the borders of your own life. But when you are one of the most recognizable faces on the planet, and you make a mistake, it becomes a headline. It becomes a conversation that millions of strangers have about you. Without knowing you, it becomes a defining moment in the public narrative of who you are. And Kevin Hart faced exactly that kind of exposure when details of his personal life became public in a way that damaged his relationships, his reputation, and his sense of self. And the easy thing, the thing that pride and ego would have suggested, was to deflect, to minimize, to point fingers at the people and circumstances around him. But Kevin Hart, in one of his most important moments of growth, chose accountability. He chose to stand in front of the pain he had caused and own it completely. Not perfectly, not without stumbling, but genuinely. And that choice, that difficult and humbling choice, was the beginning of a deeper version of himself. Then in September of 2019 came something far more physical and far more final in its warning, because Kevin Hart was involved in a serious car accident that left him with major spinal injuries. Injuries that put him in a hospital bed facing the very real possibility that the life he had built, the body he had trained, the career he had constructed brick by brick over decades, could all be altered permanently in a single moment on a dark road in California. And lying in that hospital bed, unable to move without pain, surrounded by the silence that only real suffering can create. Kevin Hart later said that he found something he had been missing even at the height of his success. He found gratitude. Real and unfiltered gratitude. Not the kind you perform for interviews, but the kind that lives in your chest when you understand how close you came to losing everything. And that gratitude, born in the deepest and darkest moment of his journey, became the foundation of a new and more meaningful chapter. Because rock bottom, as painful and as terrifying as it is, has a gift hidden inside it. And the gift is clarity. The absolute and undeniable clarity about what matters, what lasts, and who you really are when everything else is taken away. There comes a point in the life of every person who has truly been through something, who has stood at the edge of losing everything and felt the cold wind of that reality on their face, where the question changes, where the question is no longer how do I become successful, but instead, what do I want my success to mean? And this is the question that Kevin Hart began answering with increasing clarity and increasing purpose in the years that followed his recovery. Because surviving something that could have ended you has a way of reorganizing your priorities in a manner that no motivational speech, no book, no advice from a mentor could ever replicate, because it is lived knowledge. It is knowledge written directly onto your bones and your nerves and your understanding of time. And Kevin Hart emerged from that period of pain and reflection, not as a smaller version of himself, but as a larger one. A version that understood that the real work was not behind him, but ahead of him. And that the tools he had spent decades building were not meant only for his own elevation, but for something that could outlast him. Because here is what separates the people who are simply successful from the people who are truly significant, and it is a distinction worth sitting with for a moment. Because significance is not about the size of your bank account or the number of your followers or the square footage of your house. Significance is about impact. It is about what you build that continues to serve people after you have left the room. And Kevin Hart made a conscious and deliberate decision to shift his focus from being a performer to being a builder. From being someone who created entertainment to being someone who created opportunities, launching production companies, investing in businesses, developing content platforms, mentoring younger artists, and speaking with increasing honesty about mental health, about fatherhood, about the responsibility that comes with influence. Because he understood that the microphone was not just a tool for making people laugh. It was a tool for making people think, and making people feel less alone in their own struggles. I want you to think about the concept of legacy right now, because it is a word that sounds like it belongs only to the famous and the powerful, but it does not. Legacy is built by every human being every single day through the choices they make and the way they treat the people around them and the effort they put into the work they have been given to do. And your legacy is being written right now in the way you are approaching your English learning, in the way you are responding to the challenges in your life, in the way you are choosing to grow or choosing to stay comfortable and comfort. I need you to hear this clearly. Comfort is the enemy of legacy, because nothing of lasting value was ever built from a comfortable place. Everything that endures was built from a place of discomfort and discipline and the refusal to accept the current version of reality as the final one. And Kevin Hart's legacy is still being written. He is still building, still investing, still pushing, still waking up with the hunger of a boy from North Philadelphia who remembers exactly what it felt like to have nothing. Because that memory is not a burden, it is a compass. It points him forward every single morning toward the next version of what is possible. And that same compass exists inside you. It has always existed inside you, and everything you have heard in this story has been pointing you toward the moment when you finally decide to use it. So, here we are, at the end of Kevin Hart's story, and at the beginning of yours. And I want you to feel the weight of that sentence, because this is not a coincidence. You did not find this video by accident. You did not spend this time listening to the journey of a man who rose from nothing simply to be entertained. You were here because something inside you recognized something inside his story. A hunger, a frustration, a dream that has been waiting too long for you to take it seriously, and the question that opened this conversation. The question about whether the person you are today is the person you always dreamed of becoming. That question is still sitting in the air between us, and it deserves a real answer. Not the answer you give to other people. Not the answer that makes you sound humble or realistic or responsible, but the raw and honest answer that only you know. The one that lives in the quiet moments before you fall asleep, when the noise of the day stops and the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Kevin Hart was not born great. He was not chosen. He was not given a special gift that you were denied. He was given pain and poverty and absence and rejection. And he made a decision that had to be made not once, but every single morning for decades. A decision to be responsible for his own story, to work when working was hard, to stay when staying was difficult, to be honest when honesty was costly, and to keep going when every reasonable voice in his head was suggesting that stopping made more sense. And that decision, that simple and brutal and beautiful decision, is available to you right now, today. In this moment, not tomorrow, not when the situation improves, not when you feel ready. Because ready is a feeling that only arrives after you have already started. And starting is the only thing that separates the life you have from the life you want. You have been learning English today, and I need you to understand that this too is an act of courage, because choosing to grow, choosing to step outside the language and the comfort zone and the familiar world you already know is not a small thing. It is a declaration. It is you telling the world that you are not finished, that you are not satisfied, that you believe in a version of your future that does not yet exist, but that you are willing to work for. And that belief, fragile and imperfect as it sometimes feels, is the seed of everything that Kevin Hart built and everything that you are capable of building. Because the distance between where you are and where you want to be is not measured in talent or luck or circumstances. It is measured in days. In the days you choose to move forward and the days you choose to stand still. And the clock is running. It has always been running. And every word you learned today was a step, a real and meaningful step in the right direction. So here is your challenge. Not a suggestion, not a gentle recommendation, but a challenge. Go do the thing you have been postponing. Make the call you have been avoiding. Start the project you have been planning. Learn the next lesson. Take the next step. Because the world is not waiting for you to be perfect. The world is waiting for you to be present, to be honest, to be hungry, and to be brave enough to begin again every single time you fall. Because falling is not failure. Stopping is failure. And you are not someone who stops. The world is waiting for you. Don't let them wait any longer. Stay strong.